Thank you, Sean. What a great event. Thank you to Major General Don Farrell and to IBM's Jason Kelly for that opening panel. For myself, that was extremely insightful to learn more about the Texas Military Department, how they're serving Texans. I admittedly didn't know all the detail about their purpose and when they're called to action and how they work. So good education for me. And thanks to Jason for sharing insights about how IBM is working with our startup ecosystem as well. So our panel topic now is going to be pivoting DoD innovation organizations to find COVID solutions. Myself, I am a co-founder of Capital Factory. I've also spent the last 4 years in my role as Executive Director of Commercialization at the Dell Medical School at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm actually currently leading a team that's doing COVID immunology research. So it's exciting for me, for my startup universe, to be uniting with my health research universe, and couldn't be more excited about having this conversation. We've got some fantastic folks on this panel today. Colonel Joe Bookard, who's the director of the Rapid Equipping Force, and Jason Rathje, who's the director at AF Ventures. And then, of course, the famous or infamous, I'm not sure, Alex Goldberg, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at the Texas Military Department. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Hey, given that I don't live in your universe and the risk of me introducing you could be disastrous, I'm going to ask each of you to spend about a minute just sharing a little bit about yourself and your background to give context for the audience. Colonel Bookard, would you please kick us off?
Yes, good afternoon, Supernova. Before I begin, I'd like to thank you, Melly Price, for moderating today's event, and also Kevin Landtroop for inviting me to participate here today. I'm Colonel Joe Bookard. I'm the director of the Army's Rapid Equipping Force, where we're one of the Army's leads for quickly identifying and procuring immediate material solutions to meet urgent warfighter requirements. So really, we're experts in technology maturation from the concept to service phases. So how this works, problems come from across Army units, across the globe, Middle East, Europe, Africa, Pacific, and mobilized Guard units. And on some occasions, directed by Army senior leaders. Most recently, during our support to the COVID-19 back in early March, we partnered with industry and other Army organizations to quickly provide a thermal fever screening system across 15 Army installations in a little less than 5 weeks. So with dedicated partnerships, within the military and Army industry, our team, the Army Ref, we're problem solvers where we come together and leverage the military and industry and commercial partners to develop a commercial solution, a solution. So in the solutions in this particular case was here stateside in the United States, where we typically don't work. And we work really across the globe, in those other geographical regions. So that's just a little bit about me and our organization. And thanks again for allowing me to share.
Thank you for joining us. Jason.
Yes, so I echo Colonel Booker and saying thank you for having us and hosting, a series of discussions regarding this extremely important topic. For me, it's really rewarding because my background in coming to where I am today definitely was influenced by one of Colonel Bookard's predecessors over in the Rapid Equipping Force, and I come from a long line of Army officers. Obviously, I went to the Air Force, so I lesson learned from my family's experience. But it's a really cool coming together of multiple different organizations that have really been in the same space, trying to tackle similar problems and learning from each other. So I'm Jason Rathje. I'm the director of AF Ventures, which is a division of AFWorks. If you've worked with us, AFWorks, on our SIBR programs before, our STTR programs, or anything that we do that touches the procurement world in the technology innovation space, we've formalized that under a division now called AF Ventures. So a lot of the same faces and names that you've dealt with in the past, just a new name for the organization itself. What our focus has been is really in acting as the department's commercial investment arm. So we look towards multiple investment vehicles to support investing in companies who are what we consider in the non-traditional space, understanding what their business models are, their commercial development strategies to develop products and services for the commercial sector, and find ways to invest in the companies and their development efforts to be able to build and catalyze those products and services that are going to help to affect the national security and Air Force mission sets. A lot of our work, which I'm excited to talk about in a little bit, has directly influenced our response to COVID-19 as well. And I'm happy to report that many of the companies that we've worked with over the last 2 years have been instrumental in the nation's response to COVID-19. And so really happy to be here and share those lessons and hear back from you all as to ways that we can continue to improve what we do and be better partners with industry.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Jason. Really appreciate your time today. Alex.
Hey, Millie.
About you, Stoiky?
Stoiky, Alex. I go by a lot, but I appreciate you having me here. A little bit about my background. I enlisted back in September 20th, 2001. So it's been a little bit that I've been in the National Guard the entire time, right after 9/11, and just days before I started, classes at UCLA, and I joined because I just wanted to have an impact, especially after that challenging time in our nation's history, and I just wanted to be the change that I wanted to see in the world. Often you look at others to step in and to serve their community or nation or state, and in this case, that was the kind of event of how I wanted to put my life force and to make an impact. I really enjoyed the experience. So after enlisting and graduating, I ended up being selected to be a pilot. And I've been fortunate to fly F-16s and actually got the opportunity for the first half of my career doing the Noble Eagle mission, which is protecting the United States. We have aircraft 24/7 that's on alert to protect the United States, and they're all in the National Guard. Right now, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer of the Texas Military Department and the Managing Director of our new Joint Innovation Unit called TMDX. I've had the opportunity to do several fellowships and education experiences. Gone to the Stanford Graduate School of Business, fellowships with the National Security Innovation Network. I'm a DARPA fellow, DARPA being the Advanced Research Project Agency. And really our organization of TMDX is about how do you tap into the National Guard, right? Which is a third of our Army and a third of the Air Force. And in Texas, we are the largest in the nation. We have everything from F-16s to C-130s to pretty much everything in the entire Army arsenal. And how do we leverage that to tap into the innovation of our communities? How do we inspire them? How do we engage them? How do we support them? Our airmen and soldiers who have really great ideas, they're out in the field, they understand the challenges, but they also recognize the unique opportunities to improve and to be better. And how do we provide them those pathways to bring their ideas to fruition? For academia and industry, how do we support them as well? Connect them with whether it be, from Air Force Ventures and funding, where we have partnered with over 30 companies that have received over $150 million of SBIR, right? Partnered with the Texas Military Department, and happy to go down any one of those threads. But bottom line, grateful for the opportunity to be a part of the panel, have a tremendous amount of respect for my colleagues on the panel, and look forward to discussion with the community and where they want to take it.
Well, thank you. As I promised, we have quite an esteemed panel. Personally, I'd like to thank you all for your service and for your commitment to connecting with the innovation ecosystem. The last few years of my life with you all in our Capital Factory ecosystem has really brought my respect to the work that you all do and how much innovation you stimulate within the ecosystem. So really loving this collaboration. And I think the conversation today, specifically around COVID and this new world order that we're living in, is a great opportunity for the strengths of what our defense innovation ecosystem has to offer and the strengths of what the private sector have to offer is a super opportunity for us to put all of this in a very directional motion with some momentum. So with that, I'd like to kick off the conversation and just for the audience, because we do have quite a mixed level of military understanding, entrepreneurial understanding. I did beg these guys to go light on the acronyms because they'll lose me. But with that, I'd like to ask Colonel Booker to kick us off, because my understanding is that your role with this rapid equipping force, which I imagine is REF, is it like the ref? Are you the ref? Awesome. Okay, so with the rapid equipping force, your job, as I understand it, is that it's on you to make sure that our forces have the material and support that they need when they need it. And I can only imagine that in the times of COVID, your work's been profoundly impacted. Share a little bit with us about exactly how that impact, has shown up. And because as entrepreneurs, we're always looking for the right problems to solve. So what's shown up and what's eating your lunch these days?
Melly, a lot of great initiative from our U.S. small businesses. Typically for the Army REF, we focus over lines of efforts that deal with autonomous unmanned vehicles and systems, counter-autonomous systems, anti-drones, communications, electronic warfare, and artificial intelligence. But for this particular threat, it came about as, rather quickly as we were pivoted overseas, typically where we are with the deployed warfighters. So tasked by Army senior leaders to quickly identify capability that could rapidly identify elevated body temperatures. Simple. Part of the early phases of not determining if an individual entering a military facility was positive COVID, but to identify at least one of the symptoms, which was an elevated body temperature. So what we've learned during this impact is that internally to the REF, a more deliberate focus on our virtual desktop for the workforce. Because, in the Army, similar to the other services, it's a hands-on business. So when you have soldiers and warfighters and airmen, not able to do the typical business of entering a military facility without being rapidly scanned, organizations like the Army REF, identify capability. And what I've learned personally is that inside the U.S.'s ecosystem, those small businesses have a lot of great ideas. So how do you share the problems, at least for the Army, to get involved with a small business that's never partnered or never worked with DoD? That was and a lot of great ideas, but those businesses, that some did not have a clue really on how to make that initial connection. Whether or not it was, overwhelming or just, what we learned is just a very basic administrative work. But again, I think supporting the Army in this nature of what we're doing in terms of COVID, it places emphasis on the types of equipment we've identified. So for a thermal fever screener, right, so more that we can limit face-to-face connection with the vendor and the operator during the training, meaning that at the point of use on that piece of equipment, it has the ability to do tutorials. It has the ability to train the soldier remotely without bringing the soldier to the vendor together. That was a lesson that we recognize and that we're placing a deliberate emphasis on, and ensuring that the virtual operator training is just as important as a face-to-face in-person training. And as I talk to small businesses and businesses overall, is that if I'm deployed to Afghanistan or deployed overseas, right, the ability to quickly connect, is not how you think it is, even in the terms of software, integration. So at the point of use on that device, if I have the embedded software and an embedded tutorial where the operator can quickly do self-training, and then when required, reach back, for higher level training, and then, that's the way to go for us. That's one of the top lessons that we learned on this few cases.
Thank you. So clearly impact on how you move the human side of the force around. I know just in my everyday life, trying to get a bag of rice was hard. So I can only imagine trying to move logistical assets around. As I think about the entrepreneurs that are listening and trying to think about how we can create solutions. Would you mind sharing a little bit about some of the logistical challenges and supply chain challenges that have happened in the last 3-4 months?
Yeah, again, what I would say is that the ability to communicate virtually, it's paramount, because based on the conditions outside of the military installation, so the conditions in your state, may warrant a separate level of health protection or force protection level than we have on installation. But on the installation, we always do our best to mirror it, but we put the soldiers in mind, the soldiers' safety in mind. So typically where we would travel to a vendor, touch, feel, take a look at the equipment, see it in an operational use, over the last 2 months, really 2.5 months, that has not been done that way, only on a case-by-case basis. So the ones who were able to virtually demonstrate, to a high level of readiness, not maturity readiness, but to a high level of conceptual readiness to how this system can be employed, were great sellers. I think about the ultraviolet light detection for sanitization, right? So in order to be
something as simple as like 3D printed masks, right? Like 3D everybody that could is trying to do that. Like,
yeah. So and we challenged some vendors, who were on a due course, businesses on a due course to a good product that has not been updated in some time. And now it's required to open in architecture, at least for a militarized use, is that, have an ability to, to pivot on the given problem, is a key indicator for success for us to do business with them.
Yeah, right. Well, Jason, switching to you for a bit, you've got this really wonderful intersection of research. You've spent the last 4 years studying the intersection of entrepreneurship and innovation combined with national security. I know from my own academic ecosystem that research is often very insightful. It can be on the leading edge of identifying some trends, but then it is not always helpful in the immediate moment where there's tactical complications and whatnot. So the lessons you learned pre-COVID, are they holding up in the face of COVID? What are some of the things that you learned over the last 3 years, and how has that been impacted by COVID when it comes to innovation and national security?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, my background is heavily academic in nature, but prior to going back to school to study these items full time, I was in the Air Force as an engineer, as a flight test engineer, and then as a program manager in acquisitions. And so I think, when you're in the space that the panelists are in now, having that connection between, both allowing for time to focus and study commercial, as well as those experiences, and OTJ, hands-on from a procurement perspective in the force, wearing a uniform, certainly provides an interesting mix. And my experiences, as all of ours have, influenced what we're interested in and what we spend time doing going forward. So I mean, from our perspective, on the AFWorks AFVentures side, a lot of the work that we've been doing for the last 2 years is derived from research. I mean, if you look at our open topic program, which we executed most recently with our joint partners at the beginning of this year, that is all derived from a number of academic journal articles, working with a number of economists and finance professors. My own focus is in applied economics. And so we've derived a lot of this from prior research. I mean, the open topic that we use, we stole from the Brits. Smaller dollar contract awards with quicker timelines to rapidly prototype, evaluate, and make decisions and scale investment. We took that from research that was done in the Department of Energy's SBIR program. Matched investment, syndicating investment with venture capital, with other government partners. That was stolen from the NIH and the NSF. So we utilize multiple vehicles in order to pull together a program that we think fits the needs of what the Air Force is looking for in our joint services. COVID has certainly shown that these mechanisms work in a focused environment to an extent. And I'm going to be very, candid with the audience today. The way we operate, generally speaking, is we know that companies have their own ideas, and innovators and entrepreneurs have their own ideas on how they can tackle problems. And our whole organization exists to listen to ideas and continue to scale investment in those that we think have market traction on the Air Force side. When the pandemic hit, we were asked to shift resources to focus on pandemic response for the Air Force, and that grew over the last few months to support pandemic response for joint and interagency partners. And so even on Friday of this week, we released a solicitation for proposals on behalf of the Department of Health and Human Services, which is now available on our AFWorks website. But in that regard, when you're working with organizations outside of kind of what we all think is the innovation ecosystem, there's a big education process that occurs. And I think what we all need to collectively do throughout this process is not only think, hey, just because it's been successful in this key area and we believe it can be successful in responding to emergent or disruptive crises, it does take a level of education and resources to invest in helping the rest of the government understand the work that is going on here in the innovation ecosystem. I mean, I think we all know that this group of individuals is really tightly connected, and we try to do these outreach activities with the commercial sector, and often we have to do it with our own internal organizations as well. And so I think everybody on the panel can attest to having those discussions over time and trying to work with our partners, especially in the interagency community, because I've been incredibly impressed with how the national security sector has responded to the crisis at hand, as the military is known to do. I mean, we are an organization that responds to crises, right? You look at the National Guard, you look at our active duty personnel. I mean, that the organization is set up to respond in these environments, and we're bringing on other partners as well. So certainly, it's something that I think has been a space for us to learn how to respond to these pandemics or these types of crises in the future. But I do want to, kind of end on a high note. When we released a open call for ideas, but related specifically to COVID-19, we received 3,700 responses from industry within about 2 months, which and nobody's been able to dispute this claim yet, but is the largest market research ever done in the history of the federal government, right? So I mean, the ability of just saying, hey, we are listening, we're interested in what you're doing, and we're interested in how you want to tackle these problems, and then finding those ideas. Certainly 3,700 companies aren't going to get funded, but a number of efforts were funded, and you look at a lot of the companies that we do business with today, responding both in directly from a pharmaceutical perspective, but also responding on 3D printed masks. I think we printed off tens of thousands of masks, developed tens of thousands of gallons of hand sanitizers with non-traditional manufacturers, all the way through digital. Working with companies to do predictive trend analysis, right? I mean, companies that would be interested in national security pivoting to support the pandemic response. We have a couple portfolio companies that have received cyber contracts in the past through us that immediately jumped in and were helping commanders and medical providers understand what was happening in their worlds, both local and international, and being able to allow our warfighters the ability to respond in an ever-changing pandemic situation. So I've been really impressed. I knew we would all be really impressed, but I've been really impressed with just how industries responded to the pandemic, seeking ways to help, seeking ways to get involved. And that's certainly come through in great color. So,
well, the educational piece to me just can't be it's so impactful. And I say this as somebody, my background, I'm an 8-time entrepreneur. I've built and sold 4 companies. And I come from the startup ecosystem that we live in Capital Factory. And, my own calling about 4 years ago was I wanted to go into helping the health technology space. And so I spent the last 4 years in the University of Texas system, which is that's the largest bureaucratic system I've worked in. And, the first 3.5 years, I'm like, relative to entrepreneurship, this stuff is slow. And then COVID hit, and I saw fantastic response from the bureaucratic machine that everybody thinks can't move very quickly. We saw, IRBs approved in record time. We saw safety protocols put into place in order to be able to do research within the university. The project I'm leading is with a neuroimmunologist, Dr. Esther Malamed, who's actually looking at the longitudinal immunological response to COVID, right? So there's that triage moment where everybody says, oh my gosh, we have to keep people from getting sick and reduce death. Now we're in this interesting phase where we're realizing this disease process is devastating to the human body. And what are the long-term consequences, and what's the impact on, our people and our systems? And the tools that have been developed over, I don't know how many years, decades in the DoD around, SBIR funding and things that have been put into motion now can really fund figuring out that longitudinal piece, because we're just at the tip of the iceberg of understanding really what's going on, right? We're in triage mode. So you all do that really well. Obviously, Alex, I want to get to you, and the Texas Military Department and its role in responding here in Texas has been at the forefront of that. I know as the Chief Innovation Officer of the Texas Air National Guard, you kind of have this bird's eye view into the Texas ecosystem, and I think, dare I say, Texas as a model of responsiveness in the nation. Like, what have we learned? There's been great response, and there's been some not great response. And the data is kind of showing us. Would you share a little bit about your perspective on that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your Texas National Guard, like the rest of the military, we defend our country and our interests abroad. But we have a unique mission, and that is really to protect our community and our state. Right? Not only do we respond to the president, but we also support and we are, in essence, when the first responders call 911, that's when we come in. And from our perspective, when the governor stood up the strike force for procurement, which really stood up because this was unlike any other disaster that we've seen almost since World War I and World War II, where logistical chains were absolutely crumbling. And many of the challenges that we faced, whether it's diagnostic testing, logistical support, converting hospitals, hotels into hospitals, and everything in between, overextended what the state was able to do. And honestly, this is going to be a long-term extended mission. Now, most of the Guard, right, 80%, 90%, we actually have full-time jobs in the community. We actually work in industry. We work at Google and Apple and Facebook and NASA and in hospitals and universities like Texas A&M, UT, and Rice, and everything in between. And so how do we take those citizen soldier skill sets, right? We're part-time in the military, kind of full-time in our community. We have a very vested interest, and we have these partnerships that we've literally have hundreds of years of head start in these or other organizations. From Texas A&M and the Texas Department of Emergency Management to everything that we have as a state. Now it's a matter of how do we leverage academia and industry and partner in ways not previously seen, right? This is a whole of community, a whole of state, a whole of nation approach. And as from Jason, this really is about the DoD moving faster. General Hayden, who is now the Deputy Joint Chief of Staff, the #2 in the entire military. He gave a speech a couple years ago, and he basically said the thing that keeps him up at night is not Russia or China or North Korea or Iran. The thing that keeps him up at night is, as a nation, we've lost the ability to go fast. And that's where Army Futures Command and AFWorks and DIU and Ensign and the rest of the DoD innovation ecosystem, that's where we've all come in, right? How do we tap into the innovation of our community? How do we bring that entrepreneurial, spirit? Venture capital right? For every $1 we used to spend in R&D, industry used to spend 50 cents. Now, in today's dollars, in 2020, for every $1 we spend, industry spends $8. So when it comes down to diagnostic companies, we leverage all of the different program agencies. From our perspective, we're the Sherpas. And so from AFWorks, 70% of AFWorks Austin are Texas Guardsmen. Many of the folks that are in Army Futures Command, the CIO of Army Futures Command is a Texas Guardsman. The director for Ensign, right, is a Texas Guardsman. And it's not just about Texas Guardsmen, it's about Guard Nation. We have bases and facilities in every small and large city across the country. We have state partners in Texas, it's Chile, the Czech Republic, and Egypt. And we've been collaborating with our international partners, as well as the citizen soldier skill sets. Many of the heads of hospitals are actually Guardsmen on the front line. And so what have we learned through even the 20.R, the small business innovation research that Jason was just talking about? We had sponsored 20 companies. Many of them were given to us from DARPA that were actually companies here locally in Austin and throughout the country, right? It's not just about Texas. We're looking to find the best and the brightest technologies, as well as academia and citizens to partner alongside us, to work with us. Look, we can't do it all, right? And from Colonel Burkin and Jason, we need to be able to, we don't know what we don't know, right? We need to get out of the echo chambers that is the DoD. And from our perspective, because we are in both worlds, the Guard is uniquely positioned to help be those Sherpas. Look, the bureaucracy of the DoD is still the bureaucracy of the DoD. We may have, other agencies, we have different contract vehicles, but look, it's still Mount Everest. The question is, can we provide, from our perspective, how do we provide you access to people and facilities and equipment? You want to do predictive maintenance? Right, come to us. From DARPA, we'll talk about COVID specifically. There's a program called World Modelers at DARPA. It's actually led by UT Austin, the Texas Advanced Computing Center. And so we leverage them and their decision-making tools to look at water treatment facilities around Texas to be able to help diagnose, projecting where the actual disease is starting anew or where it may be retreating.
Is that the same group that's doing the AI risk predictive work around COVID?
It's actually a separate organization at TACC, but they are collaborating with each other. There's also some really impactful diagnostic testing. So from DARPA, right, that have reached out to us here, we were able to find a couple companies that are not looking for antibodies. They're looking for the RNA. Yeah. And literally from a saliva-based test, anywhere between $1 to $5. There's multiple different companies looking at different things, whether it's looking at the different curvature of the DNA to many different other aspects. And look, many of those can be game changers, where the results can range anywhere from almost instantaneously to 10 to 15 minutes. That's point of care that you can do at your house, right? We have done hundreds of thousands of tests, Guardsmen on the front line for COVID testing. Handed out tens of millions of food and helped shelter during this time. So how do we find those companies? To include one of the companies from Air Force Ventures, we have two companies that have won a Strat-5. It's a strategic phase 2. These are strategic bets that the Air Force is taking on to really game-changing technology. One is 3D printing buildings and helping with the shelter crisis. The other piece is a company called Ascension. They were printing parts for our F-16 and our C-130. We had them pivot to print masks. We collaborated with them to get an FDA EUA approval. And now we have those masks for our first responders and our military folks, like I said, the front line. It's all about into that community. And we have bases and personnel all over the state. And we want those relationships. We need your help, the entire DoD. And what we can provide, like I said, is access to our people, facilities, and equipment to help inspire, engage, and support the community to help us solve those national security challenges.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Stoichi. On the testing conversation, it's fascinating, right? We've got to strike the balance between broad testing at a low enough cost that we can do it repeatedly, but then within each of the tests that are at least on the market, there's specificity and sensitivity that yield, false positives or false negatives, and then what's the strategy for how you follow up on that? And, at a state level, we're obviously getting criticism for our response to COVID. And I think we have a really unique opportunity to lead around, given just the magnitude of our state, how do you do these things at scale? We have some unique challenges given our size and our geographical distribution. I mean, we're an enormous state, yet all eyes are upon us for how we solve that problem. So, innovation like pooled saliva testing, right? How do you use these existing products that are EUA approved or FDA approved from a long time ago and potentially leverage them for a different use? And is the Texas Military Department looking at different testing modalities that aren't the traditional PCR swab and serology-based antibody study?
Absolutely. I'll give you two examples here in Texas. One from Dallas from a company called World.io, and one here in Austin called Sensei. So what Worlds does is it actually looks at your breath. It's able to detect the 40 different unique biomarkers that are in your breath for COVID. And right now we've connected them with the Wright-Patterson, the Air Force Research Lab, and currently doing positive testing here on breathalyzer. And there's a number of solutions that are kind of going down that avenue. But yeah, these are unique modalities that we haven't looked at before, but could usher in this new era of extremely cheap, ubiquitous testing that we can have at every building, sporting event, to really open up the economy. Now, Sensei, there's a lot of research that neurologically, right, this disease has many, different aspects and manifests in different ways, from blood clotting to neurological manifestations. And in that particular case, they're looking at your eye, and they're able to detect a whole number of things that we're looking at the Air Force, from cognitive load to short-term and long-term memory to stress, to even substance abuse and PTSD, all the way to, in this case, they're able to detect unique biomarkers for those that have these neurological symptoms. Now, when does it actually able to detect it, right? Are you already able to pass it? The sensitivity, the specificity, and the sensitivity. Those things are still in development, but we've connected them with our research labs. We're giving them access to our folks, at least in the DoD. We're doing testing of our personnel quite a bit as we are out in the field as well. So being able to access patients, we were able to give them contingent purchase orders from the state of Texas, right, so that they can actually go get financing to actually help them get to EUA approval. So this is the ways in which we are modeling how we can interact with academia, industry, and the DoD, with our other government partners, to really get after it. But those are just two examples, man.
Great. And we also have one of the 5 EUA approved 100% sensitivity, 100% specificity antibody tests is Babson Diagnostics, which is an Austin-based company. That's amazing nationally. All right, we're going to pivot to some questions from the audience. We have a whole bunch of them. Let me see here. Let's start with Jason. I think for you, there's a question about how do you. I think this is relevant for each of you, right? We're in COVID time, so things are focused on COVID. But how do you balance sourcing, opportunities and innovations that are COVID focused versus not taking your eye off the longer term goal for AFWERX and your various initiatives?
I mean, it's a great question, because we always have mission, but we had mission expansion with COVID-19. We've had requirements, as we like to call them, level up in the military that were maybe lower priority that are now greater priority. Commercial telework. We've been working on commercial telework, working on IT solution sets across the military apparatus for years. And from what I've seen, a lot of that work has really risen to the next level. We have to work in a socially distanced environment, a socially distant world. And so, for us, and I'm sure every other organization that's dealing with this, it's just been, I'd like to say, we've come up with this really great strategy to maximize the efficient use of time. But basically, it's like you had your, 10-hour day before, and now you've got another 10-hour day added on. So, you now you work 20 hours a day. And that's kind of how the team's been responding in this environment. And, it's an interesting type of way to have to do both mission and work COVID. I will say, from an investment thesis perspective, we invest exactly the same way. We try to understand requirements from the field, COVID or non-COVID related, and invest in those technologies that meet requirements, right? Because for us, you know, and I think you've heard a couple of great stories about it today. For us, we invest in companies who are producing technologies that we need, and we scale investment based upon our belief that there's some pathway to recurring revenue for the company inside Fed, inside the national security apparatus. That's important for us. It's important for companies. We don't want to do one-off investments. We're not interested in, you know, pops of sugar or you know, a little bit of non-recurring. We're interested in building long-term relationships with you as a company. And I think, you know, our investment thesis is exactly the same. We increased the amount of investment we pushed out earlier this year in order to get a lot more money out into the economy, to be frank, to keep companies working through the pandemic, working on tough problem sets. Some of those were COVID specific, many were not. Many were Department of Defense specific, and we'll continue to do what we can to support companies who are interested in working with both sides of that equation.
Awesome. So we've got about 4 minutes left, and we're going to try to get through a couple of questions here. So keep responses brief. I thought this was a great question. Obviously, you all help your organizations, your individual organizations, move faster, think smarter, and equip men and women of the military. How do you cooperate, and do you strategize together between your organizations? Is there collaboration? And maybe if the answer is no, what's an area of possible collaboration?
Yeah, so I can take that that way. So in many of our ways, right, especially from the National Guard, like we have people in the Air and the Army, and we have people in AFWERX and Army Futures Command and DIU and all the other elements. We do talk, right? And one of the things that is great about the Capital Factory is that many of all these organizations are co-located, right? The Army Applications Lab, AFWERX, DIU, the Texas Military Department, you know, Innovation Unit, right? TMDX, NGA's Innovation Outpost. And so we do talk every other week to share many of those lessons learned. When we do find companies that are impactful, we do share those lessons. There are portals that are not shown to the public that we do have access, that we do keep profiles on many of these companies. The lessons learned, the impactful technology, and some of the things that, you know, lessons learned that we need to avoid, right? It's very often a company comes to AFC and they're not interested, or they had a bad experience, and then they come to the Air Force, and vice versa. We're collaborating now on small business innovation research. 20.1 was a joint SBIR between the Air and the Army, right? Many of the folks in the Air and the Army, right, work collaboratively together, even civilians in the workforce. So yes, collaboration can always be better. The ecosystem is a relatively new thing. Everyone has their own focus areas that they're really going after, that they're funding. But many of these applications, artificial intelligence, big data analytics, cybersecurity, they have applicability across the range.
Absolutely.
And I think it will get better, but we have a very good, you know, head start.
Yeah, I would add, you know, similar to all, is that it's relatively new. So although in some sectors it's very mature, but when we're sharing it across the service boundaries or across, you know, from private to public to DoD, that's less mature. So what we're describing now is the education piece. And Jason brought up a very good point. The more we can educate about what we're doing and how the process is improving, those 3,700, you know, bids that came back, that's that 80% of the 20% of untapped potential that we hadn't used yet in this particular area, because we're focused on modernization priorities. So if your good idea is not one of those priorities, it doesn't mean that it's not a good idea. It's just that at the current time, it's not a priority for the services at any given point. So I think more we talk openly about it and share across the service boundaries, but educate the folks that we need to get information from, we'll be doing great.
We've got time for one last question, and I've seen several along this theme. Colonel Burkhardt, this was asked of you related to your comment about UV. You know, are there military standards or requirements available to socialize? And how might a company who's not yet military qualified be able to reach in, find a qualified vendor or partner that could go collaborate, show them UV tech, and maybe go in through a door that's already established to expedite the process?
I'd say, for the sake of time, quickly, www.ref .mil. That's me. Contact me directly, and we'll follow up with you. So far as a military standard, speaking for the Army, what we've learned is that partnering with JPOE, the Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical, Biological, and Radiological, there's not a said standard. We have white papers that we're reviewing. One for information from a Rice professor that Heidi Maupin from ARL South has provided us with is to help start that standardization of that particular device for UVC technology. We do know it's helpful. We do know it's on military installations, but it's not a fielded item across all of the services. So that's where we're going in now. So contact me, and we'll close the bubbles on you regarding how do you get involved.
Fantastic. Well, all we could talk about this. It's important work right now. How we balance our everyday jobs with the COVID world is no easy feat. Thank you for your work, your commitment, for bridging the gap between the military world and the startup world. We're grateful to work with all of you. Have a great rest of your Fed Supernova. Thanks for your time. And I believe it's back to Sean.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Melanie.